Hey guys, welcome to the Student Side Hustle. So in this show, what we're trying to do is I'm trying to share stories of individuals and people who generally are doing something unique, doing something entrepreneurial, doing something that they're passionate about and trying to make it their career. That's not necessarily the thing that allows you to be on the show or qualifies you to be a guest on the show, but that's generally what we're talking about. We're talking about entrepreneurship, passion, etc. A lot of it revolves around bodybuilding and fitness because that's what I'm personally interested in. But what I want you to take away from this is just the fact that you can do whichever passion that you'd like to do, and you can make that into a career. It's a long path, but you can make it happen. And basically what I'm doing is showing you 80 plus examples of people who are doing it and who have done it. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I would love if you would subscribe because we've got a lot of new episodes coming out. And yeah, thank you so much for listening.
People are constantly raising the bar.
Sacrifices need to be made.
What would you guys say are your biggest weaknesses?
You are your enemy right now.
Is success a lie?
Just a fucking podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to the Student Side Hustle. This week I'm speaking to Bryce Lewis. So Bryce Lewis is a goddamn strong guy. So he is an IPF world champion. He's a powerlifter and strength coach with the Strength Athlete. And his total is 225 bench, his squat is 315, and his deadlift is 355. By the way, that's in kilos, not in pounds. In pounds, his deadlift would be like 780 something, which is insane. So how did you get into this? How did this all start?
Hey, first off, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. And I started off in powerlifting at least about 10 years ago. This is my 10-year anniversary for powerlifting. And then before that, I did bodybuilding. At the time, a lot of my friends were doing bodybuilding and kind of doing powerlifting competitions in their off season to kind of stay motivated and have a little bit of fun. And I decided, hey, I'll try that out, and ended up loving it. Specifically, I was training pretty hard in the gym before, but kind of training differently for strength and not having to diet into competitions quite as hard, and just it's just a great sport overall.
Yeah, and I think it's quite phenomenal how far you've actually gone, because it's like to become an IPF world champion while being a phenomenal coach, I think is quite extraordinary. And I think it's why you've got such a good name in the sport. Do you feel like becoming a coach was do you feel like you had to put more emphasis on one at either time? Because it's the kind of thing where to become world class at both at the same time, do you feel like they went hand in hand and sort of becoming a better athlete made you a better coach? Or do you feel like at some points you had to diverge and focus on being an athlete and then sometimes focus on purely being a coach?
Yeah, for sure. I think they're almost entirely different skill sets. There's a little bit of overlap in the fact that if you've never at least competed, then you're kind of missing out on some of the experience of what it's like to coach. You can't relate with athletes who are stepping on the platform as much, and you don't know what it's like to choose attempts and warm up backstage and stuff like that. But the skills for being a coach are different than the skills for being an athlete. I think someone can be a successful athlete without ever coaching, and someone can be a successful coach mostly without ever being an athlete. Outside of maybe doing some, initial competitions or something like that. But that passion for either is really important. So either passion for being an athlete or passion for being a coach is really important. And there are times where I really had to kind of prioritize one or the other. If I was too close to a major competition, or just had a tremendous workload or something like that. But thankfully, being a powerlifting athlete doesn't require like a full-time training schedule. You can do really well, world-class level in training 4 or 5 times a week, as long as you check off your boxes for sleep and recovery and nutrition. So
would you say
you can manage
like training smarter instead of sort of just going balls to the wall? Like training basically everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, training is difficult, but it's structured. So there's order and purpose and stuff like that. It's goal oriented toward a goal and measured. So that's really important to make sure that you're not burning the candle at both ends.
And I feel like it's the kind of thing where, like, especially in like fitness and bodybuilding, powerlifting, when you first get into it, you sort of see a lot. Well, it depends how you get into it, but you sort of see a lot of like, okay, motivation, go as hard as you can, and I think it's almost quite misleading. And like personally for myself, I think those sort of things, like this sort of just, okay, always go to failure, always do this, always do that. And I've heard quite a lot that you're quite good when it just comes to, okay, estimating how many reps you have in reserve. And it's like, that's the kind of thing that, how do you learn that sort of thing? Does it just come with time, or does it come with constantly being mindful of actually how many reps you do have? Or how do you sort of learn that?
So are you talking about the skill of rating RPE, let's say?
Yeah, and sort of knowing when to stop and why.
Cool. So the why is more a factor of what your training is calling for, at any specific time. How close are you from any major competition or major training test or something like that? How far are you from any of those events? Yeah. So that's a little bit different. But the skill of actually rating RPE is just getting used to seeing what's called for and then trying to get as close as possible. And there's going to be some trial and error early on, but you can get better at that skill over time. So, let's run through an example. Say you're supposed to do a triple at RPE 8 or something like that as an athlete on squats, and you're warming up. And as a general idea, I think it's a good idea to hit like a heavy triple at a lower RPE before, so you at least are at the target rep range, and you can kind of assess how big of a jump to take. And then use your readiness and how you perform, and maybe even some video on that last warm-up set to decide what type of jump to make up to your top set. And if you even start with that, then you're already going to probably be within a half RPE of what your plan is. So either slightly under or slightly over, or you nailed it. And that process just gets better over time with practice. It's a skill that you need to practice like anything else.
And do you feel like that plays a lot into like picking your lifts on the day? Because that's something for me as a pure bodybuilder. It's like I've never had to do that. And it seems quite daunting to think, okay, I'm going to go for 120 or whatever. It's like, does that sort of thing scares me a reasonable amount? Because I can pick my lifts when I'm doing 10 to 15, but it's like when you're doing a 1RM, it's like that is, how do you know on the day what to pick? And it's like, what sort of factors do you take into account? Especially when it's like you're at Worlds and it's like everything is amounted to that.
Right. So if we're talking about actual competition and choosing attempts, there's a lot that goes into finding what we've hit before, what has training looked like leading up to the competition, how have the last heavy lifts gone the weeks leading into the competition, and then that's basically good enough. That and game day performance. So how did your first attempt and your second attempt move is good enough for, let's say, most local level competitions. When it comes to national and international competitions, we also have to look at what other competitors are doing. So how does your total start stacking up once you finish squat and bench press compared to the other athletes to get you to place as high as possible or get as many team points as possible, things like that. But even for squat and bench press in national and international competitions, you're really just focused on yourself. So it's just a matter of coaching practice at that point and having a pair of eyes to say, oh, second attempt, I think he's got another 10 kilos in him for his third attempt.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where it's very scary for me because it's like, okay, you need to pick that. But then it's like, it feels like when I hear people say bodybuilding's not a sport or whatever, it's like, and then they make the difference to powerlifting. And I think I can definitely see powerlifting's definitely a sport. But people say, oh, bodybuilding's just you. But it's like, I think that's a very weird argument. So one thing I would like to touch on is, and it's sort of a weird question, but because I know for yourself, did you always know that you were going to get to such high levels in powerlifting? And I mean, specifically as an athlete? And then do you think there's ever a place where someone should take some attention off their athletic dream and sort of realize, I can never be this world-class powerlifter or bodybuilder or whatever? Or do you think it's sort of like, why not shoot for the moon, do it as much as you can?
That's a great question. So the first part of your question, did I know that I was going to be a high-level athlete all the time? I certainly didn't. I just kind of started somewhere and just kept adding weight whenever possible. And really, it took all of 9 years until middle of last year to become become a world champion. So I went to the world championships the year before and got a silver. And then finally the year after was able to just squeak out a gold. So no, I didn't know. And it's just kind of like setting your sights slightly higher as you can. So, it was first, there's so many goals we can set in powerlifting. We can set intrinsic goals, extrinsic goals. On the extrinsic side, we can set goals related to performance, related to Wilks score, body weight PRs, total, just kind of increasing individual lifts. So there's a lot of ways to measure progress. And I think as long as you set new goals and those kind of continue going up and you're enjoying the process, you're going to end up somewhere as a combination of your genetic potential, your acute performance in competition and in training, your ability to have low stress and sleep and recover and stuff like that. And being a world champion is it's just the product of a certain blend of those things that happened to get me here.
And
but the process would be identical for anyone else who wants to achieve whatever mastery or excellence looks like at any level.
And then what about when it comes to like the powerlifter who is, they're definitely not beginners, so they don't have all the beginner mistakes. They may be sort of intermediate looking to be advanced, or maybe looking to get to that sort of level. What do you think are the main sort of things that you see a lot of them get wrong? I mean, it is very hard to generalize these sort of things, but is there some things that they get crucially wrong that are just so important to the end goal?
Well, from my experience, powerlifting is relatively simple. Powerlifting, you really only have to train one dimension of athletic ability, strength. We're really not worried about coordination or tactics or game sense or field sense or teamwork or leadership or any of these other things. It's really just strength that we're worried about. So looking across athletes, the main things that I think people get wrong are, on the one hand, programming. So either pushing too hard in such a way that they're just kind of bashing their head against a wall and not really making any progress. Or the two biggest things that I think prevent people from doing powerlifting in the long term. Well, maybe I can add one more. So, all right, we can run through these. Number one is major injury. So some type of chronic injury or some type of thing that prevents you from making further progress or enjoying the sport. That on itself can be alone or can lead to or be a factor in burnout, just not really feeling like you are enjoying this type of thing anymore. So that's the second big reason people drop out. And I guess the third is just not making progress anymore.
Right. And then one thing I would also like to touch on is when it comes to, because you see a lot of athletes, right? Like for instance, someone like Conor McGregor, obviously he has to put on a show. And I guess maybe in powerlifting it's a little more, you have a little more sportsmanship. But do you think, even just in your own head, how much of a place do you think ego has? Because it's like, I think one of my favorite books is Ego is the Enemy. And it's like, and that's by Ryan Holiday. And it's like I think a lot of the time he sort of warns against ego pretty much in any sense. Do you think there is a place for sort of thinking anything egotistical, or do you think it sort of should be, okay, realize work is the only way to get there? Or what do you think is the general process when it comes to having an ego around competition and sport?
That's a great question. And I think there's a lot to unpack there. And I wish I kind of had some notes ready for you. But I do think there's a difference between like an egotistical drive and self-confidence. So, all athletes who want to do well have to have a certain level of self-confidence to step under a heavy barbell and a certain expectation that they're going to step in the gym day after day and they're going to train very hard. And why are they training hard? Well, they want to, and they want to have a certain self-confidence of their ability to succeed. All that stuff is really important. In fact, one of the pillars of self-determination theory is competence. We want to feel like we can succeed at the tasks that we set for ourselves. That's really important. I think that's different from egotism. which kind of strikes me as unwarranted confidence in itself. So not backed by action, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's the kind of thing where I personally think it can be so detrimental, because it's like, for instance, I remember 1 year into lifting, I thought I literally knew it all. I thought I had learned everything I needed to know, which was stupid now that I look back on it. But it's like, at the time, I was blinded and I just thought, okay, I've watched all the YouTube videos. I thought I knew everything I ever needed to know, and I was just stalled in progress because of genetics, which is like, obviously not the best thing. When it comes to something like that, it's like, how do you go about, like, say if you have an athlete with someone and they don't know, well then, do you find usually the people who come to you are ready to just sort of admit, okay, I don't know everything? Or is it sort of like, sometimes you get the odd person who sort of thinks, okay, I already know everything, why aren't I progressing? It's because of a reason out of my control?
Yeah. Going back to what you said, that Dunning-Kruger effect is pretty interesting. And if you've ever seen that graph, it sounds like you were at the top of Mount Stupid, where
Yeah.
you have extremely high confidence and still somewhat low levels of information or knowledge, and getting further along that path, you reach the valley of understanding or something like that. I've seen those terms before. Yeah, that can be a frustrating but really important realization. I'm glad you made it out the other side. We have reached some athletes who, feel like they really know what's right, and just kind of want to push back against some new idea. But for the most part, people are willing to learn, and they're hiring us, so they're kind of ready to do something different. And presumably, they're coming to us because they weren't able to make progress or enough progress on their own, and want a better way. So that's not usually a problem that we run into.
Yeah, and I find it's like, especially for myself, like say a year ago or 2 years ago, I wouldn't have gone to a coach. I recently just hired a coach, and now I'm pretty much saying, okay, I'm going to be as honest as possible with them, tell them everything that's going on, just listen to their advice, follow it pretty much no matter what. And it's like, would you say that's the best sort of mindset around having a coach? Just follow everything they do pretty much?
Well, coaching is a two-way street. Coaching is give and take, and the glue of a coach-athlete relationship is communication. So there has to be a lot of communication between coach and athlete, understanding, acceptance, distribution of roles. So you're responsible for this, this, and this. I'm responsible for these other things. So I prefer not to have or be involved in these, I don't know, I'm thinking of them as kind of soldier-like roles where there's a drill sergeant and they're barking down orders, and it's the soldier's job just to take the orders and not speak. And I'd much rather have a collaborative role, not only because I think it leads, well, not only because I know the research says leads to better athletes who are motivated longer and who actually achieve better success in the long run, but because if I'm coaching, there's a whole amount of the athlete has that I want, because it allows me to make better decisions for them. Yes. So yeah, I prefer that collaborative process for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's like, especially, I mean, there always has to be some sort of level of, like, for instance, with me, I have a spinal fusion. So it's like, there's things that my coach can't know about how I feel during a lift. And it's like, my program's very weird, and like, there's a lot of things that are just different because I can't do a lot of conventional lifts. One thing that I would like to talk about, though, is have you ever had, when it comes to being a coach, when you first started, did you find it quite difficult to sort of communicate at that sort of pure, honest level?
Yeah, that's actually one thing that either being a coach or being an experienced athlete does really help with, is the language of communication for our specific sport. So you get to know the words, and you get to, what's the difference between like soreness that is dangerous and just general soreness, kind of stuff like that. When you're early on, like, everything feels like death, maybe, I don't know. And then as you get later on in your athletic development, you're able to separate oh, this is normal soreness, or this is abnormal soreness, or this is a normal ache and pain, and this is something more serious that we need to take a look at to address. So, some experience can certainly help with delineating which of those things are kind of important.
Yes. And then how do you go about getting trust? Because I feel like that's the main thing. It's like say in any relationship, it's like if there's no trust or there's no pure honesty, then it's like things can't really progress. Like say the athlete reports things wrong, or because they're scared. It's like if there's sort of any impurity in the communication, then I feel like it's jeopardized. How do you go about getting that sort of from the start trust?
So we've got a beginning kind of startup email that we sent out to athletes that, among other things, has a document about communication, and it just kind of lays out the fact that we're not mind readers and we don't know what's in your head if you don't say it. And this program is for you, and it's kind of our best guess for a start, for where to start, but it'll evolve with time and with both of our feedback as we hone in on what hopefully works better for you over time. And really, it's just about asking often along the way, hey, what do you think? Where's your head at? How's this feeling for you? How did this week go? Do you have any thoughts? Do you have any questions? Yeah. And for the athlete to hopefully engage with those thoughts and questions and kind of respond back in turn with what's in their head and how they're experiencing training, and just using small opportunities to engage and really get to know each other a little bit better than just the numbers. Yeah,
and I feel like it's the kind of thing where if it is just numbers focused, then it's kind of, you're missing a huge sort of part of it. Do you find, is there anything that you think a lot of coaches are doing? I mean, you can't. It's hard to sort of see how they coach on an intimate level, one-on-one. But do you find, is there sort of things that people are doing as coaches or that sort of stuff that is just sort of missing a lot of the key principles?
Yeah. I just finished presenting on this very topic in Dubai, which was a wonderful experience, and in the process of kind of sharing it more broadly on social media. But yeah, if you datafy the process a little bit too much, so if you break things down into numbers, there's this underlying idea in management that started off in the US in the 80s that says something like, if you can't measure it, then you can't manage it, So it's kind of like a heavy data-centered focus. So things like even measuring employee happiness, employee productivity, how much time are they interacting with customers, all this kind of stuff was reduced down to numbers. And in the process, ended up missing a lot of the essence of what's really going on, and some of the stuff that just happens in normal conversation that's really not as measurable. And it's missing a little bit of some of that essence. So the same thing is true in coach-athlete relationships. Just the fact that that type of just broader communication, at least more chances for communication, are really, really important.
Yeah, and I feel like, especially what you said before about like the questions, it's like checking with them and asking them. It's like that sort of thing seems as though, especially in a sport like powerlifting, where I haven't done shit when it comes to powerlifting, but not even close. Like I've done some joke 1RMs, but it's like, I feel like in a sport like that, so much of it is like how you feel on the day. I'm like, is that sort of correct?
Yes. So your mental game, how prepared you are mentally, plays a lot into how ready you're going to be to lift a 1RM, especially at higher levels. So take two lifters with equal muscular ability, equal frames. So, carbon copies of each other more or less. And one of them, just for simplicity's sake, had a bad breakup with their girlfriend the day before. Right. And now, hey, go do your 1 rep max out on the platform. And the other one didn't. And of the one who had a bad breakup the day before is going to drop by, even 5 to 10%.
Right. So it's like the sort of thing that you wouldn't normally think of, but I think the detriment, do you think there is a place to sort of minimize life stress in a way, and sort of realize, because I've even felt as a bodybuilder, I mean, I don't take it that seriously, like I'm not competing yet, it's like, but I take my training pretty seriously. Like I train obviously more serious than the average gym rat, but it's like I still find, I mean, it's either, sometimes I find I like going through periods where I try and let myself have a long period of rest, so I try and become relatively, I guess, lazy. Not I guess lazy, but I have a bit of a workaholic approach sometimes. But it's like, do you find it's good to sort of see if you can minimize life stress outside if you want to become the best in the world, or did you find during those periods where you're aiming to be the best and you know that you're sort of on that track, did you find you have to sort of let things in your life fall to the wayside?
Ideally, yes. Sometimes that's not really possible. But there's certainly research to show that we kind of have one system for stress in the body. Robert Sapolsky has some great stuff on this when it comes to just humans and stress in general, and some of our evolutionary backdrop when it comes to our responses to stresses more generally. But applying that to sport, sure, if we minimize life stresses, we can maximize performance, at least on an acute level. And if those acute levels add up in the long term, well, that could be quite a bit of progress that athletes are either getting or missing out on, depending on how much life stress they have.
And then when it comes to something like competition day, one, how do you go about sort of minimizing stress and making it all about the lifts? And if that is that even the approach? Or how do you go about even preparing for a 1 rep max like that? It's like, I guess you get 9 attempts, but it's like, do you just sort of go up and do it, or do you mentally prepare yourself? And do you think it should be individual to the athlete, or do you think it's sort of, most people should get either mentally hyped up, or, because I know there's degrees of how much you want to get hyped up depending on what period you are in your program, but how much should someone mentally prepare themselves for the lifts, and how much should you like hype yourself up? And then also, what sort of atmosphere should you try and put yourself in around that sort of competition day?
Got it. So performance on the day of competition should be a well thought out, well planned approach. The farther in advance someone has a plan and someone knows what to expect and is mentally preparing themselves, the less anxiety they're going to have the day of the competition, because they've kind of mentally gone through what to expect, and they know, at least in broad brushstrokes, how things are going to go. What's my plan? This is our contingency plan if things go well, and this is what we'll do if it moves a little bit heavier than expected. And these are the goals, and this is what we're looking for. And this is where I'll be, and these are my roles as a coach. These are your roles as an athlete, and everything is just laid out. And the more we can do that, the less anxiety, the less stress we have athletes on the day of competition. So that's part of our role as platform coaches. But as far as the individual athlete's ability to perform on the platform, now we're really talking about arousal and peak arousal, when you said about getting hyped up and just putting it all out on the platform. I think there's some individuality, both in terms of attempt selection plan. So not every athlete is the same there, but not every athlete is the same when it comes to level of arousal. So you have some athletes who, if you put metal music in their ears and you slap them on the back, they're going to go out there and miss a lift, like hands down. It's just way too much stimulation for them. It's just over the top. It's too much,
Do you feel like it's a sort of degrees of stimulation, or do you think it sort of can go in any direction for any particular person?
Well, I think that we each have an optimal zone of performance. There's a bell curve distribution for most people, and then individually we each have some smaller subset of that specific zone. So I might be on slightly lower end than normal. Some athletes might be on the higher end. They can't perform without just yelling out loud, and that's the kind of thing that really gets them ready to lift. So there's a ton of individualization there, and it's our job it's the athlete's job to understand where their own level of arousal is and how to get there and how to maintain that level, whether it's low or whether it's high.
And do you think does generally that level of arousal sort of have does it sort of have not much of a place outside of the competition day, or does it have a place on, say, the hard weeks of training?
I would think it has a place anywhere we want good performance for the athlete,
Right.
which is most of the time. So there's nothing wrong with hyping up in training, or maintaining your slightly lower than normal level of arousal if that's your peak.
Right.
Basically, we want to find your peak and get there as much of the time as possible, whatever that ends up being. And that level of arousal may be determined by some biopsychosocial backdrop of your experiences in the past, who you've watched, who you've looked up to,
Right.
Individual biological differences.
Right. And then what about when it comes to, one thing I would really like to touch on is the whole argument of powerlifting being a sort of safe or unsafe sport, or good or bad for you. And I feel like people see it as very black and white. But do you think when it comes to things like that, like obviously for someone like myself, I have metal in my spine. It's like I can barely make an arch on a bench. I can't deadlift, can't squat. Obviously, powerlifting is not for me. It's pretty black and white there. But do you feel like for the average pretty healthy individual, powerlifting is in general good for you? Or do you feel like because of, say, maybe the limited range of motions or the high loads, do you think it's bad for you? Or do you think you can even draw that conclusion?
I think it's not harmful. So resistance training compared to others has an extreme rate of injury. Powerlifting isn't exactly resistance training. It's resistance training under heavy loads with barbells repeatedly. So the type of injuries that powerlifters usually get are not acute. They're usually more chronic things like low back aches or achy hips or shoulders. In fact, I think among those surveyed, shoulders and hips were highest, followed by elbows or something like that. And that's the kind of stuff that can usually be mitigated with controlling training frequencies and training intensities to such a degree that the athletes don't get hurt too much. Powerlifting is extremely safe. Squatting is a basic human movement. It's pretty close to something that we and our biological predecessors have done for a very long time. Same thing with deadlifting. Bench press, not quite as much, but still a pretty natural movement plane. So we're not asking awkward things from the body, more or less, outside of maybe extreme low bar positions or extreme arches in the bench press. And if you stay within the broad band of acceptable techniques for the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, and program effectively, you can avoid serious injury for the length of time that you do powerlifting.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I know very little about powerlifting, but it's just like, I think people make some silly arguments and without really much evidence to back them up. And I feel like people make the similar thing about bodybuilding, and I'd say bodybuilding maybe is less healthy, just because when you diet down, it's like that's not really the best thing for you. But it's like long term, compared to the standard diet or compared to standard lifestyle, obviously I'd say it's better. But one thing I would like to touch on is becoming known in the industry is like right now fitness is booming. Everyone wants to be a figurehead in fitness. Every 18-year-old kid wants to be Gymshark athlete or powerlifter. Like they want to be something of that sort of regard. When it comes to becoming known, did you sort of plan to become a figurehead in the industry? Or was it the kind of thing that you just sort of stumbled into? And then how did you keep being known while also being respected and being sort of someone who people looked up to and could admire without having any sort of, I guess, drawbacks or negative personality traits?
This is a really good question, and I do think that it's something that a lot of people think about. I was lucky early on to have some good role models in 3D Muscle Journey, even in Matt Ogus and a few other people there in kind of the early YouTube era. I got lucky, so I didn't certainly plan to kind of get thrust into some level of social media acceptance. I went up to see my friend Matt Ogus, and he put me on his YouTube channel, and I ended up getting over some time, like 27,000 subscribers, and put out some YouTube content. And really, my main mission statement early on was just to help people. And I don't know, I like helping people. I like putting out information. It makes me feel good that people enjoy it and find some use for it. And I'm able to kind of pass on things that have worked for me. That's the main way these days that I engage in social media, that and sharing my training. And to be honest, looking back, that's the main way that I've always engaged in social media. So I don't really like doing the, just the pictures of me with some kind of cheesy caption and stuff like that, just pushing out an image for the sake of brand. It's really, if it doesn't have some type of information, I tend to shy away from posting it. So that's been my main way of interacting with social media, and hopefully I continue to do that as I go forward in the future. But we're really in a different age now than we were even a short 5-10 years ago when it comes to just being in social media. It's so visual now. Like, Facebook is dying down. Facebook was at first, at least, a word-based platform. Then it was a picture and video-based platform, and now it's kind of everything. And Instagram's really very, very visual, and not really a whole lot of, unless you force it by creating infographics and content and stuff like that. An info platform, it's really a lot about looks and images and videos and stuff, and that's fine. But there's really not a whole lot of other place for that type of shared. And so, I don't know, I think we're in this transition period. It's almost not enough to be an athlete. You have to be an athlete and be publicly known. Like, if we take a look at other sports, baseball players or gymnasts or anything like that, like, they don't have massive social media followings that they're sharing their progress and they're sharing their training and their updates and stuff like that. They're just athletes. They just compete. And I kind of wish that we had a little bit of that in powerlifting, at least.
Right. Do you not think I sort of think it's like, I mean, it depends on who you follow. And I think there's a lot of trash in fitness, obviously. But it's like, personally, I love that social media is a thing. And I mean, I think I wish people could just, like, I know there's a lot of people, obviously, Alberto Nunez, he sort of shares a lot of people who they're just athletes. They're just athletes to be athletes. And it's like, I feel like that is relatively rare. Is that sort of what you're getting at there?
Can you kind of say that a different way? Like, what's Alberto doing? He's
like
just being a role model?
He'll share someone on his Instagram story, and like, he'll share them for being an athlete, not because they're popular on social media or anything. It's like they might have 1,000 followers or less than that, but it's like he'll share them just because they're a good athlete.
Yeah, I've discovered some really good athletes across sports that way, and I'm able to kind of get some new ideas and follow someone's journey and stuff, and even social media connects us with Chinese athletes, Japanese athletes, and we get to see some amazing stuff. I haven't really made up my mind about the whole, like, I feel like we've taken a turn in the past 6 months about reposting, and reposting is now so normalized. And I don't know how I feel about that, kind of where it's headed. But you're right. Just being able to have exposure to more high quality athletes is one of the amazing things of social media.
And what about when it comes to like because I think, do you think someone should try and become, because I don't know if you know Gary Vee, his whole argument is like, document, don't create. And I kind of think that's a bit of BS, because it's like, when I documented, or when I tried to create through documenting, I was trying to teach, but I didn't know jack shit. And it's like, I think that's all too common now. It's like, people are trying to teach, but they're 1 year into their sport. They're like barely doing anything. And it's like, I was in that position. I was 1 year in trying to teach people shit. And it's like, I frankly didn't know what I was talking about one bit. It's like, I knew the basics of lifting, if that. And I didn't even have the basics anywhere near down, because they are quite complex. But do you feel like that's sort of quite common in powerlifting? Because I know it's common in bodybuilding. It's like people who don't actually have that much knowledge, or don't actually just want to teach, they just want to get famous on social media, whether they want to do it through evidence-based fitness or not. It's like, I don't think it's really relevant. I mean, I'm not sure if it's a bad thing or a good thing yet, because it's like, why not have more exposure for evidence-based lifting?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, I feel like there is a place for people to just sort of wait, become a good athlete or become a good coach first.
Right. Like you're too new. You
Yeah.
need to earn your stripes or whatever the expression is.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a place for that. In my mind, at least, I think intent is probably the most important. So if your intent is to share true information and help people, then you won't mind being corrected. You will seek out better information, and you'll defer to other people when someone has said something more clearly than you have. You won't self-promote when such a thing flies in the face of what the goal of the message is. So I think intent matters a lot, and intent dictates what you look like and what gets shared and how it gets shared. But if you imagine you were back in math class and you started learning some basic algebra, and the stuff that you're learning is true, even though it's basic. And, in this parallel universe, you've got an Instagram account and you're sharing all your basic math with everyone else. And it's basic, but it's still true. And then later on, you learn some trigonometry and you learn some calculus, and you start sharing some of that stuff. And then you go on, you learn some differential equations and you share some of that stuff. And you look back and you think, oh my God, I was sharing basic math. Like that's crazy. I wasn't an expert yet. And sure, but you were still trying to be helpful and you were still sharing true stuff. It was just simpler stuff. You know what I mean?
Yes, I agree. Yeah. It's sort of, I mean, I think people are jumping into it a bit too early now. Like it's like, I don't know what it is, but it's just everyone can have a voice now, which is a good thing, but it's like, that doesn't mean everyone should, I think.
Well, it goes back to intent. So I think for a lot of people, the intent is, I want to share information so that I appear knowledgeable because I'm selling something or because I'm trying to make myself appear a certain way.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you feel like it's a similar with coaching? Do you feel like people are jumping into coaching? Because I know in bodybuilding, it's definitely apparent. Like, especially, I'm not in the UK bodybuilding scene because I live in New Zealand, but a lot of my podcasts and friends are from the UK bodybuilding scene. And it's so apparent that people jump into coaching too fast there. And they're just every single man and his dog wants to be a coach. And it's just,
I think a lot of people,
like every single person is trying to be a coach. Do you feel like it's the same in powerlifting or?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I think a lot of people view it as just a little bit of a gold mine, maybe, or just a way to make a quick buck, and not necessarily as a way to help athletes, or view it as a career path or some other motive. But there's certainly a lot of that people are just becoming coaches too fast without developing the skill set to support that. I mean, depending on how fast of a learner you are, you can kind of fake it till you make it if that doesn't take too long. Or if you have a network of support, you can use them to help you develop yourself faster. But even with all of that said, I think a lot of people are jumping in too soon and providing coaching just too soon.
Do you feel like there's something... Is there anything you'd recommend to the sort of person getting into this to, I guess, like, for instance, there is something I've seen between all sort of people like yourself, like Mike, Greg, Eric, etc., etc. It's like, I'm seeing, I don't know what it is, honesty, critical thinking skills, something like that. I don't know what exactly it is, but it's like, it seems to be unanimous behind people like yourself. Do you know what that is? And do you know why should people achieve it? And like, what makes it so people can trust you guys? Like, there's a lot of things that goes behind that. Obviously, that's a complex question, but it's like, what do you think is the main things that sort of is unanimous between that whole sort of evidence-based figurehead sort of thought process, I guess?
Man, that's a good question. I think it might be a range of things. One thing it might be is humility. So knowing when you are more likely to be right and when you're more likely to be wrong, admitting that, which kind of feeds into critical thinking skills a little bit, and just kind of understanding where your biases are and where you're more likely to be right and wrong. And I think maybe another thing is just compassion, compassion for the lifter and for whoever you're talking to, and what the goal of all of this is. Yeah, I've noticed that in a lot of people too. Just kind of a genuine sense of wanting to be a teacher, and wanting to do good, I guess.
Is there any sort of places or people or thinkers or anything like that that you'd recommend to develop your critical thinking skills?
There's a few videos, like the old videos that I love on YouTube by this channel called Qualia Soup. And he must be Australian, by the way, by his accent. So maybe you'll run into him someday in Australia. But yeah, it's just a video on what is critical thinking, what's the difference between critical thinking and open-mindedness, how can we test ideas and take in the things that are true and try to avoid the things that are false, and basically keep our bullshit detector on. Yeah, there's certainly some of that. Also, take a philosophy class. I think most community colleges offer philosophy classes, even basic philosophy classes. They might not teach you. I mean, you might not even be interested in, metaphysics or the nature of the universe or anything like that, but you end up with some level of critical thinking and problem solving and working through stuff that I think filters its way into other areas of your life in some sneaky way that really, really helps.
And I feel like it's the kind of thing where the more I delve into it, the more it allows me to sort of think more clearly about literally everything. It's like it makes me a better athlete. I can think better, but then it also helps my relationships and it helps me as a student. So it's like there's so many areas that it's applicable. Is there any sort of specific books that you really love or anything like that where it's like that's a must read for the powerlifter or for the just general person who wants to enhance their critical thinking skills?
There's a really good book called On Being Certain. That one's really good. It just kind of talks about where this feeling of certainty comes from, and how and when we can trust it and when we can't, and how that leads us in certain directions. Right. In psychology, there's a really good book by Daniel Kahneman, who's kind of a foundational figure in psychology, called Thinking Fast and Slow, about some common cognitive biases and where those might come from. Some Sam Harris stuff is really good. That's kind of stuff at the top of my mind. Yeah.
And then one thing I would like to touch on is, even as myself, I have a relatively small following, but it's like the people who come to me, and maybe this is just my personal issue, but I find it hard to have compassion for the masses. Like I find it hard to, and maybe it's unreasonable to think that you can help everyone that comes to you, but how do you go about sort of, when you get, I don't know how many messages you get a day, but it's like, how do you go about either just thinking, okay, I can't reply to all of these, or I need to realize I can't solve all these people's problems, or do you think you should try at least, or what is your sort of philosophy around that? Because it's like we're in a new age where anyone can contact you at any time.
James, do I still have you?
Oh, yeah. Like
you cut off just a little bit after,
right.
In a new age.
Right, so we're in this new age where it's like anyone can contact you whenever they want. There's really no boundaries with that. How do you go about sort of either being compassionate and trying to help them, or sort of realizing I only have X amount of hours in the day?
I'm probably not the best person to ask about this, just because if someone asks a good question, I will almost always try to answer it. So I value other people's time more than my own in that circumstance, at least. And I just really I want to help people if I can, and if I feel like I have something to contribute. So yeah, if someone sends me a message, I usually reply to it. If someone sends me to it, because I know, especially coming from someone they probably were nervous about reaching out to, they will feel really good about it. I've kind of been burned a few times by someone just copy and pasting the same message to me and 5 other people that I know. And we all look and see that we got a literal carbon copy message, and they were just fishing for opinions from different people. But those cases are not common. Those are kind of the exception. So, I try to help people as best as possible. And if it ever gets overwhelming, sometimes you can see patterns in, these 10 people are asking the same question. Let me make some kind of guide to help that answer that question that I can post online. Or if I'm thinking about this right now, maybe there's a chance that a lot of people are too, and I can help other people out as well.
I think it's the kind of thing that once you become someone who gets questions like that, it's sort of, you got to figure out how you want to tackle it. And I think there's a lot of, it depends what you want, I guess, because it's like, for me, I don't get that many messages, so it's not like I have this massive workload to reply to. But I pretty much give everything I can to them, but it's like, do you ever feel like it's going to get to a point where you're just like, no, I have to just not reply? Because it's just too many.
For sure. That point might not be far off, where there's just too many questions or too many comments, at least. So you pick the ones that you feel like are valid questions or important or something like that, or you just don't reply to any, and you find other ways to engage with people. I don't think we have an obligation to be accessible by anyone. Like, we should be able to have our private lives and protect our free time and stuff like that. This new generation of kind of being an always on professional is really weird and kind of a wild west for the world. So I'm unsure where that's going to lead, but you're certainly under no obligation.
I'll finish off with this last question. Do you have any sort of, when it comes to being like, you'd probably would object to the term famous on social media, but it's like, when you have a large following on social media, it's like, well, as you said, you're always on. There's always something you can do that you can put in the category as quote unquote work. Do you currently do anything now, or is there anything you plan to do in the future to sort of, I guess, limit your time around social media, or just limit your time, I guess, to stop workaholicism? Is that the right word? Workaholism.
At least it's a word that I know. I've played around with a few things in the past. I've played around with some various social media blockers that limit my time either on the computer or on my phone. Basically either make me more aware of how much time I'm spending, or, just after 8 p.m., like, you can't access it anymore or something like that. I'll leave my phone in the other room if I'm working on something specific. Certainly some strategies like that to try to get into some deep work, because that state is precious, and I certainly want more of it. Like, for me, I'm really distractible, so it takes me a good 10 minutes or so to kind of feel like I'm in the flow and I am connected with what I'm trying to either research or write or something like that. And a notification can kind of pop me up out of that, or my dog needing to go out, or something like that. And I want to protect that state, because it's really precious. It's valuable.
I feel like it's the kind of thing that we don't get much nowadays. And I think, would you attribute a lot of your success to getting into that sort of deep work?
It's hard to say. Sometimes, for sure. Some of my best work has been written in one go, with no interruptions.
Right.
You're just able to get the whole thought out, and I've just felt really good about that, and I'm able to tie things back into earlier things and just kind of have the thought run through the whole thing that I'm writing. It's not as necessary, because most content these days is short form. It's Instagram stuff. It's captions, that are maximum 2,500 characters, or 300 words or something like that. So that longer form content is not as wanted in at least fitness right now. Even if it might be worthwhile. But I certainly feel like that deep work is really important.
Yeah, and I feel like, especially like in the gym, it's like, if you're, well, I mean, it depends, I guess. It's different for powerlifting, but it's like, I feel like you should be thinking about how you need to approach the next lift. It's like how you need to do that, what you should be doing pretty much the whole time. I mean, I'm getting to a point at my university where I might even study in the gym at some point, but it's like, I'm hoping to avoid that as much as possible, because I think even with anything, when it comes to especially creative work in a very competitive field, Like podcasting, like it's like podcasting for me is one of the few things where it's like I'm doing nothing but talking into the microphone and talking to the other human being. That's all I'm doing. And it's like I don't think that it shouldn't change from that ever. And if it changes from that, something's wrong. So it's like,
Right.
And I think that I wish I could get that deep work in every area of my life. But I mean, I'm just fighting that social media battle right now, trying to figure out, okay, how much do I want this in my life? And trying to juggle that. Like I just read, and when you're saying deep work, are you referencing Cal Newport's book? Because I think,
Yeah, I am.
yeah, I just read his new book, Digital Minimalism, and it's about social media and all that, and it's absolutely phenomenal.
It's really a kind of great experiment that we're in right now, and I really don't know. We're headed somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I personally kind of think it's a scary place. Like my thoughts about it are very narcissistic, but I hope that in the future, everyone will sort of come to their senses and realize we can't spend 6 hours a day on our phones. But maybe that's not actually that bad of a thing. Like that's the thing. We don't actually know, or I mean, we know to some point, but it's like, how bad is it?
Right. So where is it going to go before we finally draw the line?
Yeah, it's like, is it bad that everyone, like I take the bus everywhere, I don't drive anywhere. So when I take the bus, every single person on the bus is on their phone, without exception, like 99% of people. But is that a bad thing? I don't know. I kind of don't think so. Like, did people actually ever talk on buses?
Well, yeah, the rebuttal to that is two things. Number one, we have no idea what people are doing on their phones. Maybe they're talking to their loved ones or scheduling doctor's appointments or, stuff like that. Like the phone is a tool as much as it contains social media on it as one piece. And the second thing is those pictures you've seen of people in like the 1850s and they're all on a bus or in a train station and they're all on newspapers. Like there wasn't this golden age where everyone was talking to each other all the time,
Yeah, it's like I saw yesterday, I noticed 2 people on the bus were reading books. And I feel like books might even have a little bit of a resurgence because of the danger of phones. Like,
yeah, maybe.
I think that could be interesting. I mean, they're obviously less convenient, but it's like that gets you that state of deep work. And maybe you can't get that on a 15-minute bus ride, but obviously I think it's important. I think it breeds a lot of, I wouldn't say productivity, but it breeds deep thinking, which breeds a happy life, in my opinion. Like it's like that can lead to so many different things. Like clarity in pretty much every aspect has to come through deep thought.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I also think these conversations about social media are important because who knows what's next? Whether it's some type of virtual reality, like what's that movie that just came out not too long ago?
Oh, I have no clue. But it's like there's so much. Oh, was it Ready Player One?
Yeah, that's the one.
That one. Yeah. That, like, if that became real, that would be fucking scary. It's like that sort of stuff. I mean, I find it hard to comprehend that being actually the reality, but it's like people would go into the thing that is going to be the future, and it's like they're not going to be like, oh no, that's actually too far. Let's stop here. Like people are going to do the thing that feels the best at the time, because it's like right now, I feel like we're a species of short-term love. It's like we love everything that's short-term, and it's like so many people don't. Or it's maybe it's a narcissistic point of view, and I'm trying to sort of figure out if this is actually the way the world is, or if I'm just being a narcissist. But it's like it feels as though the world, in many many ways, is becoming very short-term orientated.
Yeah, I mean we're fighting a very primitive biology in a lot of cases that enjoys short-term reward and reinforcement and gratification and stuff like that. There's just easier ways to get it now than ever before. Like one of my favorite quotes kind of about like the difference between how things were before and how things different are now. Like a single Dorito has more flavor than like a peasant in the 1400s has ever had in their entire life.
Yeah.
And
that's the thing. The environment is so strong now. It's like everything is so addictive and stimulating. It's like I don't think people are the problem, but it's like the environment makes people this way.
Yeah. So whether we have to make a conscious choice about this or have to find some other way of addressing this problem, I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
No. Do you feel like it could be solved? But I feel like it had to be solved through some sort of, like, maybe government intervention, because people are just getting. But I'm not like a conspiracy theorist or anything, but it's like maybe that's what they don't mind us being robots. It's like, I guess it's like, if that's even the case, maybe that's dramatic, but it's like.
I mean, that feels a little bit dramatic to me.
Yeah.
But there may be some type of regulation too. So, we have learned that methamphetamine is very addictive. You know what I mean? And the government comes in and says, all right, United States, no methamphetamine for you guys, like off limits. There may be some kind of version of that when it comes to social media. We found that there are some serious negative risks to using this kind of stuff, whether, increased depression or suicide or, narcissism or just decreased work production quality. We're going to control this somehow, whether it's controlling the companies or controlling the internet access or whatever, some type of regulation, because sometimes that's what governments do. They act on behalf of the people. And, I'm all for libertarian approaches. If Mike Israetel listens to this, he's extreme libertarian. Just, let people do whatever they want. But, I think there are some problems that need larger level solutions than people can come to on their own, or at least most people can come to on their own.
You mean like individuals can come to?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I agree. It's sort of, I think it's, with all these sort of things, it's so complex, and it's like, it's hard for one person to, like, I would say definitely in the past, I've been addicted to social media, I guess. It's like, I've had a compulsive desire to check it. It's been like, I'm trying to reduce it from 6 hours a day on average, like 7 days a week, to like 2 hours. And it's like, that's extremely hard. And I don't know if it should be that hard. Is 2 hours just short? Like, I don't know. Like, that's the thing. There's so many questions, but
yeah,
it's a complex problem that, yeah. Anyway, we'll move on. But thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you? Everything Bryce Lewis.
Well, I post a lot of stuff these days on my Instagram. Speaking of social media, at Bryce_TSA. We coach athletes around the world for powerlifting and other strength-related endeavors at thestrengthathlete.com. In fact, in a few days now, we're releasing a free beginner powerlifting approach. Not only is the approach really awesome, it's a 9 and a 13-week approach, so you can use it either for off-season or into a competition. It's got exercise selection for males, females, the volume adjusts. It's got variation. We're really happy with it. It's kind of the beginner approach that we wish we had when we first started powerlifting. And all we want is your email address, so you're welcome to get that at our website. I'm really bad with discount codes. Go check out Mass monthly applications in strength sport. It is a monthly review of research in strength sports, and it's really, really good. So check that out. Also, if you're just getting started, check out the muscle and strength pyramids. Those are good too. Check out our own TSA podcast at it's The Strength Athlete. Search it on iTunes or Spotify. But yeah, James, thanks so much for having me.
No worries. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Student Side Hustle. I would appreciate so much if you would leave a review if you'd like to hear more of what I'm saying. Then I would love if you would follow me on Instagram or check out my other social media, all linked in the show notes. And again, I would just like to say thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful evening and study hard.